Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session today that will be discussing and unpacking the ATUR spectrum recommendation. As you can see on our agenda today, myself and Kezias will do the welcoming, and then we'll have Zoran, our CTO, doing the technology developments and spectrum. And then we'll have Dr. Mogazi, who was leading the project team, that will be presenting the recommendations. And then also we'll have a panel discussions that will be discussing the recommendations and also taking your further questions, and then close. Hopefully, we'll close in there on the time. Just as a background, thanks very much. This work has been coming quite a while, and in the discussion that we had with the Africa Telecoms Union starting in 2019, there was an identification that Africa has been doing quite a very great work in terms of preparing and coordinating towards the WRC process. And then what we identified that is that after the identification of the spectrum post the WRC, as the countries go back, then they become by themselves in terms of the implementation of the recommendations and making spectrum available after the WRC. So out of that, we had a number of engagements with the Africa Telecoms Union and the other stakeholders, which has led to a formalization of a program to say then we need to be able to come up with the recommendations, our support process that we can be able to support the countries and support the stakeholders to be able to make sure that we can be able to benefit out of this ICT and out of this work that comes out of the WRC. So with that, we had a MOU that was developed out of those discussions that started in 2019. In 2020, we signed off an MOU to be able to support the process of R2. And I'm glad to say after the MOU was signed, there was a lot of countries that came on board to be able to support the process. And then with that, there was a project team established, which is led by Dr. Mogazi. And Dr. Mogazi will be able to talk a little bit about the process that we followed in terms of developing the recommendations. And then also in terms of the outcomes of the key recommendations in the different areas.
Okay, so thank you so very much, Shlesi. I hope you can hear me well. So let me just pick it up from your very last substantive statement to the fact that what is the role? Why are the industry partners here? So your role is a noble one. That hopefully where you operate, your interactions with the various policymakers, so these are the ministry or the people on the ground, so these are your regulators. As you interact with them, indeed, you are able to nudge them, as in say, hey, there is this thing, but you are going the other way. What's up? I mean, what we expect is, for example, by now, release of this spectrum, what are we doing?
So we're going to look at a topic called technology developments and why spectrum matters. And we're going to focus on 5G and how we see at Ericsson that 5G should be deployed in most efficient way. And then what kind of frequency spectrums we need for 5G deployment. So let's start with 5G evolution. What kind of steps we see as most efficient way in deploying 5G. We have those 4 steps on which I'm going to focus now. First, this is the baseline where we are at the moment. We are here if we didn't start already deploying 5G. So we have 4G, optimally in couple of bands, maybe some 4G deployments in sub 1 gigahertz, 700, 800, maybe 900. Very important to have that band, and we'll come back to this. Then maybe in 1800, 2100, or maybe even in high frequency. And hopefully we are doing carrier aggregation between these bands and taking advantage of combining the benefits of all of the bands. Typically, first step in deploying 5G, and this is not mandatory, but this is typically what majority of operators are doing. They're deploying 5G in that mid-band, 3.5 gigahertz or 2.6 gigahertz. So this is 1 or maybe even 2 carriers, 100 megahertz carriers. And we are doing this dual connectivity because this is 5G non-standalone, so we need to have 4G supporting 5G in 5G non-standalone deployment. 3.5 gigahertz has advantages, also some limitation when it comes to coverage, and we'll cover that one, but provide, maybe it's a sweet spot and it provides a lot of capacity. So this is the first step. Next step, and which is very important, is to provide a wide area coverage, preferably countrywide coverage. And to enable that countrywide coverage, we need to deploy 5G in the lower bands, in the bands where we already use today for 4G. So we're going to discuss how to do this, but this is only efficient way how we can deploy 5G if we use this lower frequency bands, so bands below 1 gigahertz. And then again, we can do this carrier aggregation, which is doing magic. And we will really focus on that one because that's really the big advantages for both 4G and 5G, doing combination of low bands and high bands, where we have the best of the both spectrum. So this is a second step, and that's a great preparation to what will come as a next step, as step number 3. And step number 3 is introduction of 5G standalone network. For 5G standalone, so here was 5G non-standalone. With 5G standalone, we don't need any more 4G. We're going to keep, of course, 5G non-standalone, but we don't need for 4G to deploy 5G standalone. And the whole change actually here with 5G standalone is introducing new core. Everything what is done in a 5G non-standalone, of course, all deployments, all base stations, spectrum, everything will be reused simultaneously for both 5G non-standalone and 5G standalone deployment. So the big difference here is a core network, but that core network is really massive change with cloud native. So this is the main difference. So from the radio point of view, this step number 2 was critical because step number 3 is actually just changing all the core network. Nothing to do on the radio side, maybe just software upgrade. And then we expect, and we are seeing massive demand in traffic. This is, if you was looking at Ericsson mobility report, twice a year we are issuing Ericsson mobility report, which I can say is industry standard to see how the traffic development was going so far and what's predictions when it comes to traffic and what's prediction when it comes to subscriptions. And if you look at that report, you see that by 2025, almost 50% of traffic globally, this is mobile traffic generated globally, almost 50% of that traffic globally will be on 5G network. So we're going to need a lot of capacity in 5G. And ultimate capacity booster for 5G is millimeter wave. So in step 4, we see that using that spectrum, which is not usable for previous technology, now 5G is enabling us to use also millimeter wave. Actually, let's see, there's some noise coming. Maybe if we can check, we can keep on mute. And there is some also echo. Thank you. So this is the 4 steps, and of course to go through this step, to realize, to deploy 5G, we need spectrum. Spectrum is the key. And for that, we like to use this picture and showing that we need all the spectrums. We need spectrum low band, below 1 gigahertz. We need that mid band, a spectrum 2.5, 3.6. And then we need also millimeter wave eventually. I like this picture on the left side, and that's one of operator in US, which is very proud that they have all the spectrum and they are using all the spectrum for 5G deployment, where they're saying this comparison with the cars, and they said low band, it's like trucks, speedy, great for long trips and travel where others can't. And then for the mid band, super fast, reliable, and good around the town. And then we have this millimeter wave like dragster, ridiculous speed, ridiculous capacity, but can't travel long distances and cannot turn the corners. So I like this. This is very good because it shows that all the bands, all the spectrum has their advantages, but also they have some challenges. And by having all the spectrum available to operator, actually we can emphasis on advantages and overcome the challenges. And we will look at this one. But let's look first at the mid-band. This spectrum, as we said, for 3.5 or 2.6 gigahertz. This is what we see globally as the main band for deployments. I would say over 90%, well over 90% probably, 5G networks globally are deployed in this mid-band. And as I said, this is like seen as the sweet spot, giving good combinations between the capacity speed, something which customers and industry expect that we're going to deliver with 5G, but also giving a relatively decent coverage, particularly if we use this massive MIMO technology to extend the coverage.
The second type of recommendation that we've been working on is spectrum licensing. And I'm sure that all of you appreciate the fact that licensing is a main pillar in encouraging and promoting investment. In a time where technologies that everybody is keen to have, like 5G, needs huge investment in order to have this non-standalone network to cover mid-band and high band and low band. And by the way, Zoran, I like so much the examples of the different cars. So we need to encourage operator to provide the three types of cars: the super race cars, the sedan car, and the truck car. Next slide, please. Right, so balance. It's all about the balance. Regulators should not focus only on maximizing the spectrum revenue, but we need to focus on the high quality services provided to the end users. And the COVID pandemic has highlighted that even within our homes, we need to have a reliable connectivity. Promote technology and service neutrality. Well, that's, I don't know. At the COVID pandemic, it comes, at least to me, as a surprise that many countries on a temporary basis allow technology neutrality. But the question is, why technology neutrality was not allowed in the first place? So the spectrum recommendation that was published from the ATU was a very good opportunity to remind us of, I don't know, some concepts that should be taken as granted, such as technology and service neutrality. And thirdly, it's important also to have a balance between license and the license examined. And we've seen recently that there is calls for even some sort of unlicensed new radio, especially in the 6 giga. And we need to keep that balance. Spectrum trading, it's not, I don't know, in place in many regulators, and it was a good chance to remind ourselves and to remind the regulators about the importance of that. And finally, spectrum hoarding. There are a lot of details when it comes to auction and how to design auction in these spectrum licensing recommendation. But what you can see at least at your screen, that is the end of the end. But the recommendations per se provide a lot of details, even with regard to the smallest details in terms of designing spectrum auction and how to promote competition between the operators.
It was a vast group of ecosystem players that were providing perspective, which has now resulted into this document. And I think it was either Kejias or Dr. Mugazi who mentioned it, that the fact that this is how this work has been produced, makes it a lot more acceptable, basically, to all industry players, including policymakers and regulators, by the way. They also played a key role, and especially for the structure of ATU and the fact that at the end of the day, the final decisions lies with these entities. It was very good to see how all of the input and feedback from industry was taken into consideration in the final outcomes of this work. What has come out from this work, I think, like KJ has mentioned, is the first set of recommendations. I think there's still work that is ongoing, which is intended to develop a lot more of these sort of recommendations. What has come out now is recommendations around four broad areas. So there's the first set of recommendations around spectrum audits. which basically look to see recommendations around how spectrum usage is monitored. Spectrum has been assigned, how is it being utilized? What kind of technologies is it being used to deploy? Interference-related issues, how are they being addressed? What amount of spectrum has been assigned? What amount of spectrum is left? So there's recommendations around looking at that aspect of spectrum management, including very clear examples from other markets.
I've put in the chat box the links to the recommendation. I would advise that everybody look at them, and again, we invite you to participate in our next steps and in the revision of these recommendations. Thank you.
Rasil, thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for making time to join us today.
Thank you.
Yeah.